Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another 2024 presidential election prediction. Today, I have former chair of the House Republican Conference, Liz Cheney, and incoming Congresswoman from Wyoming, and Senator Susan Collins of Maine, versus incumbent President and Vice President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, respectively. You probably recognize Liz Cheney's name from the media these days, her father being the former Vice President of the United States. Now, I think that the safe blue states will remain blue. Liz Cheney doesn't have any outward appeal to voters in these states. You might say, oh, Susan Collins, but I think that traditionally very liberal voters won't go for her. Maine is not quite as liberal as, say, Massachusetts or Connecticut, so I think that those states remain safely for the blue column, especially when you consider there's an incumbent Democratic president. As for the Republican states, oh boy, we have a mess here. These states don't necessarily approve of Liz Cheney, but I assume that they'll take her over Joe Biden simply because of where she stands on policy most of the time, being very pro-Second Amendment and so on and so forth. So I think she does still carry the safe states for the GOP by solid margins. Maybe not 15-point margins in all these states, but I think she will win them. Texas, I think, will still go to Cheney. More like a lean margin where Texas is concerned, because I feel like, well, neither of these candidates really appeal much to Texan voters. I feel like they'll still take the Republican over the Democrat. And remember, I think Joe Biden's gains in this state came predominantly from, suburban areas that Liz Cheney will potentially win back as not really a moderate, but as an anti-Trump Republican for the most part. Alaska, I say it's likely it's going to go to Cheney, but maybe not by that 15-point margin. I think Cheney wins back Arizona by a slim margin. As I said, in Georgia too, just because of the suburban voters who will hop on the train with an anti-Trump candidate. People who voted for Joe Biden but may become disgruntled by increased gas prices, as well as the border situation, perhaps, not to get too political. Nevada is always hard, but I'm still going to give it to the Democratic ticket because it's been Democratic ever since 2004. The last time Liz Cheney's father was on the ticket, interestingly enough. I think that Nevada's been trending a little more Democratic these days, but actually, no, a little more Republican these days, but I think that an influx of, liberal Californian voters here will help the president and vice president. The Rust Belt, I see still going to Joe Biden, and the reason I believe this is because while he may not necessarily appeal to all voters here, I believe that some of the voters that are very much Trump supporters, I think this is true of all states, that Trump-supporting voters may be less inclined to come out in some of these states, even the safe red states, but I think that in a state like, say, Alabama or Mississippi, which are so solidly Republican anyway, it's not really going to matter in terms of the state's results. But I think this sort of voter apathy on the GOP side could hurt Republicans in these Rust Belt states. Iowa, I'm still probably going to give to Cheney. Ohio as well, just because of the way they've been trending. Florida, it's hard, but I'm going to say that it still goes to Cheney. Ron DeSantis and their incumbent senators aren't going to be very happy with her or big fans of hers, but I think that Florida's a little more Republican these days, and you might think that there could be voter apathy, and there could, but Florida wasn't necessarily as competitive in 2020 as these above-mentioned Rust Belt states, so I think it still remains in the GOP column. I have it as a tilt margin here, but it could be anything from tilt to lean. I'm actually going to change it to lean. Missouri still goes to the GOP here. Nebraska, didn't mean to do that. I actually think that District 2 will remain Democratic by a small margin. Yeah, let me go change that. But the rest of the state, votes with the rest of the region. I think Indiana too will be anything from likely to safe. North Carolina, Cheney suburban voters, she'll get them out. Virginia, I forgot, but that's safe. As for New Hampshire, I think it's going to be lean for New Hampshire. It'll be a little more competitive. These northeastern voters actually may like Liz Cheney and Susan Collins. Susan Collins being from this area. Susan Collins is a well-known moderate, and Liz Cheney is known as being anti-Trump now, so I think that'll help them in this region. Still not enough to win it, though. Maine at large in District 1. And I think District 2 will have the same sort of Rust Belt effect, where it tilts back to the Democratic Party. And that's it. But that way doesn't work. Forget that. So this is a pretty close election, but Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have a second term. Still, though, this is more competitive than the last election with Biden and Harris and Trump and Pence. So this sort of more competitive atmosphere may have an effect on the GOP on how they go about elections in the future. But, the incumbency is a pretty strong factor. So I think that Biden and Harris will hold on here. Interesting. Sign out. Bye.